General Hospital spoilers for Monday, August 18th reveal that Drew had always understood the value of influence, but now he was demonstrating just how far he was willing to go to use it. It wasn't enough to challenge him openly or to win through debate or evidence. Drew wanted to secure control in a way that left Michael with no options and no room to push back. That meant reshaping the very environment Michael operated in, bending it to Drew's will piece by piece, until every avenue of resistance was cut off. The turning point came when Drew decided to bring Liz into his strategy. On the surface, it might have looked like a practical move. After all, Liz had access to sensitive information. The kind that could sway perceptions, decisions, and even legal outcomes. But this was no casual alliance. Drew wasn't asking for help, he was exerting pressure. Using his position to pull Liz into a role she may not have wanted but could no longer refuse. The adjustment in his tactics was clear. Instead of confronting Michael directly, he would go after the things Michael valued most, the channels of truth and accountability he thought he could rely on. And the most immediate, most critical of those channels was the set of medical tests that had the potential to influence Michael's future in profound ways. Making decisions based on information Drew had curated. This wasn't just a bureaucratic maneuver, it was an act of sabotage in slow motion. A way to undermine Michael's standing and options without ever throwing a single public punch. The danger lay not only in what Drew was doing, but in the way he was doing it. He had adjusted his approach to be more insidious, more difficult to detect. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no clear moment of attack. Instead, the damage would seep in gradually. Whether she acted willingly or under duress, being entangled in Drew's scheme meant becoming part of a chain of decisions that could spiral into scandal or worse. Drew's authority gave him the leverage to keep her in place, to ensure that any resistance on her part could be neutralized with the right threat or the right promise. The new adjustment here wasn't just Drew's targeting of Michael, it was the way he had shifted his focus to the people around Michael, using them as instruments in a larger design. By controlling the gatekeepers, he could control the gates, and by controlling the gates, he could dictate what Michael saw, heard, and believed. This manipulation of the test results was more than a tactical move, it was a statement of dominance. It told everyone paying attention that Drew was willing to cross lines. To redefine what was acceptable in pursuit of his goals. It blurred the boundary between personal vendetta and strategic warfare, and in doing so, it set the stage for a conflict that would no longer be about disagreements or differences in approach. This was about raw power and the willingness to use it without restraint. The potential fallout was staggering. If Michael discovered the extent of Drew's interference, it could spark a battle that wouldn't just stay between them. Families could fracture. Alliances could collapse, and the ripple effects could touch every corner of their shared networks. The moment the integrity of those test results came into question, every decision based on them would be tainted. People would start asking who had known, who had acted, and who had stayed silent. Trust, once broken in this way, would be almost impossible to rebuild. And yet, from Drew's perspective, the risk was worth it. The obsession driving him now had grown beyond any concern for optics or long-term consequences. He was shaping the board so that by the time Michael acted, the game would already be rigged against him. By embedding his influence in the very systems Michael relied on, Drew ensured that every choice his rival made would be constrained, every path narrowed to the one Drew had chosen. This was control at its most absolute. And it was being exercised with a precision that left little room for error. For those watching from the outside, this was no longer about a single conflict or a single set of test results. It was about the normalization of control, the quiet acceptance of manipulation as a legitimate tactic. Once those lines were crossed, they would be impossible to uncross, and the damage wouldn't stop with Michael. It would seep into every relationship, every decision, until the entire system was operating under the shadow of Drew's will. That was the Tam Hoa, the looming catastrophe. Not a single explosive moment, but a sustained campaign of influence that would leave everyone wondering how much of what they knew was real, and how much had been shaped to serve one man's obsession with control. Lulu had always considered herself a steady and dependable force in her son Rocco's life, the kind of mother who could navigate even the most chaotic storms with a calm hand and a clear head. Yet, over the past several weeks, she had begun to notice subtle but undeniable cracks forming in the foundation of that control. At first. And that realization filled her with a creeping dread. The adjustment to their lives had seemed straightforward on the surface. New rules, new routines, and a commitment to open communication were all meant to strengthen their bond and protect Rocco from the unpredictable forces that swirled around their family. Yet somewhere in those changes, Lulu had underestimated how deeply other influences, both obvious and hidden, could slip into the spaces she had left unguarded. She began to notice shifts in Rocco's tone when he spoke to her, as if his loyalties were being pulled in a direction she couldn't quite see. His stories about where he had been or who he had spoken to became increasingly vague. This wasn't just a parenting challenge, it was a dangerous shift that could leave Rocco vulnerable to manipulation, to threats, and to decisions that could place him in harm's way. Lulu knew that losing her connection to him could mean losing the ability to protect him entirely. Her mind began to churn through possibilities, trying to pinpoint where this had started. The adjustment that was supposed to bring stability to their lives was instead creating a new vulnerability. Lulu's attempts to balance discipline with understanding were being undermined by factors beyond her control, whispers, half-truths, and the quiet erosion of trust. Every day she delayed confronting the truth, those influences seemed to grow stronger, shaping Rocco in ways she didn't recognize. She knew she had to act. But the danger lay in not knowing exactly where the threat was coming from. One wrong move could push him further away, and in this delicate, high-stakes game, distance could mean disaster. Lulu was beginning to understand that she was no longer dealing with just the challenges of motherhood. She was in the middle of a fight for her son's safety and loyalty. A fight she might already be losing. And with every passing day, the risk was mounting, not just for Rocco, but for her own ability to protect him from whatever storm was gathering just beyond her reach. Chase had begun to notice subtle shifts in his thoughts and feelings whenever Willow was near. A pull that had once been gentle and easy to dismiss but was now steadily intensifying into something undeniable. At first, he told himself it was nothing more than lingering affection from their shared history, a natural residue of the time they had once spent together, the hardships they had endured, and the trust they had built when life had been far less complicated. Yet as the days passed, that quiet thread of connection began to weave itself into a more vibrant and insistent pattern, coloring his every interaction with her in a way that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. Every glance lingered a little too long. Every conversation seemed to carry an undercurrent of unspoken longing, and every brush of her hand seemed to echo long after the moment had ended. Willow, for her part, appeared to sense the change even if she did not immediately acknowledge it. There was a warmth in her eyes when she looked at Chase now. A softness in her voice that had been missing for quite some time. She found herself smiling more easily in his presence, as though the weight of her current burdens momentarily lightened whenever he was near. In the quiet spaces between words, they both seemed to be remembering the kind of comfort they had once found in each other, a comfort that had been left behind when circumstances, choices, and obligations had pulled them apart. Now, those same circumstances were shifting again, opening the door to possibilities that neither of them had dared to consider in recent months. What made this transformation so striking was how naturally it was unfolding. There was no grand confession or dramatic turning point. Just a steady build of small moments that carried their own kind of intensity. A shared laugh over something trivial. A conversation that lingered well past the point where either of them had intended to leave. An instinctive reach for the other's hand in a moment of worry. All of it painted the picture of two people circling back into each other's orbit with a force they could not quite resist. The tension between them was no longer the awkward tension of unresolved past issues, but the charged, almost electric awareness of two hearts recognizing a connection they thought they had set aside. The more Chase leaned into this pull, the more he began to realize that it wasn't just nostalgia or fondness, it was something very much alive. Something that seemed to gain strength each time they crossed paths. The feeling was accompanied by a renewed sense of purpose. A desire to be there for Willow in ways that were both emotional and tangible. He wanted to protect her, to offer her stability and kindness. To be the person she could turn to when the weight of her world grew too heavy. It was as if the part of him that had always admired her resilience and compassion was now stepping forward with the clarity of knowing he did not want to simply admire her from a distance. For Willow, the timing of this shift could not have been more complicated. Her life was far from simple. And there were still unresolved ties and lingering responsibilities that made the thought of new love both thrilling and frightening. Yet she could not deny that Chase's presence had begun to stir feelings she had not expected to feel again, not just a fond recollection of what they had been, but a very real attraction to what they could be. It was an attraction that carried with it the promise of something deeper, something that could grow into love if given the chance. And as each day passed, that chance seemed less like a distant possibility and more like a choice they would eventually have to make. The spark between them was no longer just a private undercurrent, it was becoming visible to others, too. Friends and colleagues began to notice the way their eyes sought each other out in a crowded room, the way their conversations seemed more animated and personal. The way their energy shifted when they stood side by side. It was as though the entire world could sense that something was building. Something that neither Chase nor Willow could continue to downplay. The quiet truth was that a new love story was already taking shape, and with each shared moment, it was becoming harder to ignore. What made it even more undeniable was the way this connection was igniting a new vitality in both of them. Chase felt more grounded and inspired. As though his path forward was being illuminated by the simple joy of her company. Willow, despite the complexities of her circumstances, found herself feeling lighter, more open. More willing to imagine a future that did not have to be dictated entirely by her past. Together, they carried the sense of something rare and worth holding on to. A mutual understanding that whatever was happening between them was not just a fleeting spark, it was the beginning of something that could truly change their lives. In the end, this attraction was more than a passing curiosity or a harmless flirtation. It was the reawakening of feelings that had been buried but never extinguished. The realization that their story might not be over after all. And as the connection between them deepened, it became increasingly clear that this was not just about what they had been to each other before, it was about what they were becoming now. Every sign pointed to the same truth. A new romance was not just possible, it was inevitable, and it was about to set off a chain of events that could transform everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the courage it takes to take a second chance. Josslyn had always believed she was in control of her own life, even when the world around her descended into chaos. Over the past year, she had faced heartbreak, danger, and more than one brush with death. But nothing could have prepared her for the revelation that was about to unravel her sense of reality. It began subtly, a lingering glance from someone she didn't entirely trust, a conversation that seemed innocent but carried a strange weight. An old case file slipping into her hands without explanation. These little fragments did not fit together until one evening, when she uncovered a piece of information so explosive it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. This wasn't just about someone else's mistake or a casual coincidence. This was about her. Her life, and a connection to something she never thought possible. The secret was tangled with the World Security Bureau's most covert operations, and the moment she stumbled into it, she realized she had walked directly into a carefully orchestrated plan, one that had been set in motion long before she even suspected it existed. At first, she wanted to dismiss it as paranoia. To tell herself she was overreacting. But the evidence kept mounting, and with each new discovery, the truth became harder to deny. Her role in the WSB's strategy wasn't voluntary. She had been maneuvered into place like a piece on a chessboard, each of her past choices subtly guided to lead her exactly where they wanted her. The realization chilled her, every romantic entanglement, every shift in her career path, even moments that felt like accidents or acts of fate, had been influenced by forces she couldn't see. Now, the Bureau's presence in her life was not theoretical. It was personal, deliberate, and more dangerous than she could have imagined. The deeper she dug, the more she understood that this wasn't a simple assignment. She wasn't being asked to help the WSB. She was being used as bait. Somewhere out there, an enemy the Bureau had been hunting for years was watching her, waiting for the right moment to make a move. And Josslyn, whether she liked it or not, was the lure designed to draw them out. The thought made her skin crawl. She wasn't a trained agent, she didn't have the layers of protection someone in the field would normally rely on. She was a target with no clear line of defense. And that meant every interaction, every glance from a stranger, could be the prelude to something catastrophic. Even worse, she couldn't tell anyone. The Bureau's control over this operation was absolute, and they had made it clear that involving outsiders could derail the mission, and put lives at risk. The secrecy weighed on her. Not just because it isolated her from the people she trusted most, but because it forced her to live with the constant tension of knowing a threat was near but not knowing when or how it would strike. The strain began to seep into every part of her life. She found herself scanning crowded rooms, mapping escape routes without thinking, flinching at the sound of an unexpected phone notification. Her friends noticed the change, but she brushed off their concern with half-truths and quick smiles. Inside, she felt like she was standing on a frozen lake, listening for the cracks beneath her feet. The danger escalated when she intercepted a coded message that was never meant for her eyes. It was short, almost casual in tone. But she recognized enough of the embedded signals to know it was a warning, a signal from someone inside the Bureau who believed she was in far more peril than she had been told. Whoever sent it was risking everything to reach her, and the message was clear: the plan had changed, and she was no longer just bait. She was the primary target. That shifted everything. If the Bureau's enemies knew who she was and what role she played, then any illusion of control was gone. Now, the threat was immediate. From that point forward, Josslyn stopped pretending she could simply follow the WSB's plan and stay safe. She began her own counter-move, quietly gathering her own sources, slipping questions into casual conversations, following leads that the Bureau either hadn't noticed or deliberately ignored. The more she uncovered, the more she realized this operation was about more than her. It was connected to a much larger agenda, one that involved political leverage, stolen intelligence, and a network of people who were willing to erase anyone who got in their way. Each day brought her closer to the truth, but it also drew the noose tighter. Her movements were being watched more closely than ever, her phone and email occasionally behaving in ways that suggested tampering. Late at night, she thought she heard footsteps lingering outside her apartment door, and once she found a tiny listening device planted in the lining of her gym bag. That discovery confirmed what she had feared: someone wanted to know her every move, and they were close enough to touch her life without her even realizing it. Josslyn knew the only way to survive was to stop thinking like the girl she had been and start thinking like the people who were hunting her. She began to anticipate their steps, leaving misleading trails, planting false conversations in places she knew they were listening, forcing them to chase shadows while she carved her own path toward the truth. Still, the danger was mounting. Every time she made progress, the Bureau's plans seemed to shift, as if they were adapting to her resistance. The more she fought to take control, the more she understood that she was locked in a battle not just with the Bureau's enemies, but with the Bureau itself. In the end, the secret she had discovered was only the beginning. It wasn't just a piece of information, it was the first crack in a wall that had been built around her life for years. Now that she had seen what was on the other side, there was no going back. The WSB's plan had pulled her into a world where loyalty was a currency and trust was a weapon, and every step forward brought her deeper into a game she hadn't agreed to play. The only question left was whether she could turn the game on its head before it consumed her completely.